Google Earth is a fun program to play around with, so I decided to look and check out Mount Hermon to see where it is, and so this is where the 200 fallen angels, called Watchers, landed on planet Earth. They landed right about here. Mount Hermon is actually a mountain range. It's a range of mountains, and this is pretty much the center of the mountain range that is Mount Hermon. Now keep your eyes kind of in that area right there. Now maybe this is just my overactive imagination as a filmmaker, but I was looking at that and I was like, wow, it kind of, just the outline of the topography there, take it for whatever it is, I was just like, that's pretty interesting. Yeah, kind of cool. So that's where the ancient texts say that the fallen angels landed. Now, this is Mount Hermon today. And have any of you heard of a guy by the name of David Flynn?
Yeah.
David Flynn has done some amazing work, and you can confirm this for yourself on Google Earth. He determined that the location, the center of the Mount Hermon mountain range, is 33.33 degrees north by 33.33 degrees east from the Paris prime meridian, which was the true prime meridian until they changed it for political reasons. Now, Google Earth, you'll see, has 35.54, but if you subtract the difference between Greenwich and Paris, you end up with 33.33. But he took it a step farther. He measured the distance between that location and went west and found that it was 2,012 nautical miles. 2012, there's that magic number, right? 2,012 nautical miles from that location to the Paris prime meridian, and 2,012 nautical miles from that location to the equator. Again, is that a coincidence? I don't think so. I think it's all adding up to something. Yeshua said, "As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man." Those of you who attended yesterday's talk, remember I had a chart depicting the days of Noah, and all kinds of weird and wild and crazy stuff was going on there, showing that the 200 fallen angels participated in what I call the Genesis 6 experiment, somewhere around the end of the 9th Jubilee. Each of these gray columns represents a 50-year time period at the Jubilee. Each column is 1,000 years. So they show up right about here. The flood's not till you get way back over here. So between 1,000 and 1,200 years, the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, producing all sorts of monstrosities and causing all kinds of damage, to the point where God said, my entire creation that I once called very good is now completely corrupt. Completely corrupted in about 1,000 years. Now, the question arises, after the flood, we know that there were giants in the land in those days and also afterwards. Genesis 6, 1-4 talks about the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards when the sons of God came into the daughters of men and created the Nephilim, the great men of renown, right? Now, a lot of people subscribe to what's called a second incursion, that what they did in Genesis chapter 6, they continued to do. I don't believe that that's true, and I'll give you my reasons for it as we go forward. But basically, they take it with the Nephilim, the giants were on the earth in those days, and also afterwards when the sons of God came down to the daughters of men and created giants by them, again and again and again and again is the way they would interpret that scripture. I submit that another way you can look at that scripture, and I believe the Hebrew lends it to this interpretation as well, is that as a result of what happened in the days of Jared, there were giants in the land in those days and also afterwards. You see what I'm saying? That the first cause was in Genesis 6 that had repercussions that continued afterwards, not that angels continued to mate with humans again and again and again and again. There's several reasons why I believe that the second incursion is not true. The 200 who landed on Mount Hermon in the days of Jared received an extremely severe punishment from God for what they did. In fact, even before they began, Semjaza said, I have a feeling, I know what we're about to do, God's not going to like this very much. And so I have a feeling that I'm going to go through with it, but I'm going to turn around and all you guys are going to be back there and you're not going to go through with it as well. And everybody said, no, we're in it. We're all together, all for one, right? 3 musketeers, 200 musketeers. They all put their hands together and they created an oath. And essentially that's why Mount Hermon was called Mount Hermon, because it was based on the oath that they all took to go through with it. When they did go through with it, their judgment was extremely severe. And we know that from a couple places in Scripture. I chose the Weymouth New Testament version of this passage, 2 Peter 2:4. For God did not spare the angels when they had sinned, but hurling them down to Tartarus, your translations probably say hell, consigned them to caves of darkness, keeping them in readiness for judgment. Tartarus is a very significant name, the reason why he chose it. Now, you remember, at the time that the New Testament was written, They were in a Roman society, a Greek society, and the Greek gods and all that was very well known to everybody. The Greeks were very familiar with Tartarus, because Tartarus is the location where the Olympians, after they overthrew the Titans, imprisoned the gods, the Titans. It's the prison of the gods. Now, biblically speaking, we would say it's the prison of the Watchers. It's a very scary, very bad place. That's why I chose that translation, because it actually it puts the actual word there, Tartarus, instead of hell. And hell is essentially, the underworld is divided into three compartments. They had the upper level, the Greeks called paradise, or the Bible calls the Abraham's bosom, the good area where Lazarus was. And then there's the area where the rich man was in the story. That's more like what we would consider hell, a place of torment. But then Tartarus is the lower level, even below that. Very, very, very bad place. People were familiar with that when Peter wrote this. And in Jude, a very similar scripture, and the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day. And the book of Revelation, something really interesting there too, is where John makes reference to the 4 angels that are bound in the river Euphrates. What's that all about? Now, the ancient texts say that they are buried in the sands of the earth, and something that's very, very interesting that we should probably be aware of is the book of Enoch talks about the angels were to be buried, the watchers, the fallen angels, were to be buried for 70 generations. And if I remember, I think Psalm 90 verse 10 defines a generation as 70 years. So if you take 70 generations times 70 years, you end up with 4,900 years, and you back up 4,900 years from today, you end up right on that chart that I showed you. We are at the end. Yeah, whoa. That's right. Seriously, we are approaching the day when they are going to be released. And I believe if you look at the book of Revelation and the 5th and 6th trumpet judgments in particular, I believe that's what you're seeing, is the release of Nephilim. On my blog series, I created a timeline. I believe it's probably the first of its kind. I've never seen anything like it. But I created an end times. Everybody's seen time charts of the 7-year tribulation period. You know, Tim LaHaye, a lot of other people. Everybody's got a time chart for the end of the world. But I have never seen one that incorporates the Nephilim. And it changes things significantly when you do incorporate that. So you can check that out through our materials there. And if you go to seedtheseries.com/blog, there's a link called the 7-year tribulation period, and there's a timeline chart that I created there that incorporates the Nephilim and the release of them. Now, in the book of Enoch, it's really interesting because there's a severe judgment imposed on them. And how many of you would like to see your children massacred? Anybody? No, nobody. Of course not. Well, the first thing that the fallen angels had to do was watch their first generation offspring kill each other off. They were assigned 500 years and no more, and within that time, they were to kill each other off. So they were forced to watch their own children murder each other. And then God imposed a severe judgment and bound them in chains and put them in Tartarus and all that. And so they essentially hired Enoch to more or less be their attorney and present their petition to God. And so God said, okay, I'll play your little game. I'll work with this whole attorney thing. Okay, here you go, Enoch. This is what you're going to tell them. No, I do not accept your petition. I do not forgive you. You will never have peace. It's a pretty severe judgment that God gave the watchers through the words of Enoch. And it says there, then I went and spoke to them all together, and they were all afraid, and fear and trembling seized them. These guys were terrified by the judgment that was about to be imposed upon them. So I ask you, if you're like in the military, let's say, and a platoon of your buddies is assigned to a task, and the task goes really bad, and the judgment for doing so is horrible, and you are watching this, how likely are you going to be to volunteer for that same duty? Are you going to volunteer? You just saw all your buddies, what they did went horribly bad, and the judgment that they received was horrible. So are you going to volunteer to do the same thing? No. So can you imagine any of the other... Okay, Lucifer's already outnumbered 2-1, right? So do you think he wants to risk any more of his people either? If that's the sentence for doing what they did, every time they did that, they would lose more people. So A, I don't believe anybody's going to volunteer for it, and B, I don't believe Lucifer would take the chance of risking more people. That's my opinion. And regarding the terror, there's evidence of that also in the scriptures where Jesus comes across the maniac of Gadara. They had the legion, right? And he asked them what their name is, and they said, legion, because we are many. And it says, and they begged Jesus repeatedly, do not send us into the abyss. Please do not send us into the abyss. Shows that the demons were painfully aware of the horrors of the abyss as well. Put us in the pigs anywhere, please. Just don't send us into the abyss. Again, the judgment was extremely severe. Now, this is from the movie Clash of the Titans that just recently came out. The pre-flood giants were absolutely huge. The book of Enoch says that, and they bear great giants whose height was 3,000 ells. I've read many scholars that translate the 3,000 ells to be 300 cubits, which is 450 feet. Interesting number, because that's the same number as the length of the ark, 300 cubits. But if you can imagine a 450-footer, that's pretty huge. Now, we have trouble imagining that, but the Greeks didn't have any problem imagining that. They called them the Titans. The Titans. So the pre-flood giants were extremely huge. The post-flood giants, if you think of them in Greek mythology terms, you would have the Titans versus the Olympians. The first generation Nephilim were 3 to 4 times larger than the tallest of the post-flood giants. So something clearly happened for them to be that much smaller. And we have evidence of the post-flood giants and some of the heights. And we've seen this chart if you came to my talk yesterday. You got the average 6-footer guy right there. Then you got, just for sake of scale, you got what I call the Goliath scale, which scholars would place anywhere from 9 to 12 feet, depending on who you read. Then you have the Og of Bashan scale, roughly 15 to 18 feet tall. Then you got the Canaanite giants there, and Amos 2:9 talks about the Amorites being as tall as cedar trees. Now, if you heard me yesterday, I don't believe God's in the habit of telling tall tales and exaggerating. I think he said, there's a guy standing next to a cedar tree, and they're about the same height. See, the Amorites as tall as cedar trees. Cedar trees start at 35 feet and go up to 150 feet, the cedars of Lebanon. So they were huge, but they were not as big as the pre-flood giants. Post-flood giants, maybe the max about 150 feet compared to 450 feet. So that's the second reason why I don't believe that there was a second incursion, because when you mate angels with humans, you get the 450 footers there directly, at least according to the text. Third reason, as we saw in the chart, the Nephilim were on the earth for 1,000 to 1,200 years. And in that time period, they were able to completely corrupt and destroy God's creation. So if they're able to do that same thing, and that was pretty effective, right? You'd have to admit that, 200 watchers corrupting God's entire creation in 1,000 years is a pretty effective campaign. Well, they've had nearly 5 times that amount of time to do the same thing. If all they had to do is what they did in Genesis 6, why are we still here? They should have destroyed the earth 5 times over. Fourth reason is the text itself in the canon of Scripture. When the spies went into the land and they brought back the report, they said, we look like grasshoppers compared to those guys. It says that the descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. Where do they come from? Nephilim. It didn't say those giants were coming from angels mating with humans. It said the Nephilim were of the Nephilim. These are offspring of Nephilim. So it appears to be a genetic issue there. And then, of course, in Amos, it's talking about the Amorites, and we know that the Amorites were children of Canaan. Okay, so based on the testimony of Moses and Amos and the striking lack of any mention of angels in association with all post-flood accounts of giants, I believe that the Nephilim seeds continued via genetics, not copulation. What does that mean? As I was looking at the lineage of the sons of Noah, and if you saw my talk yesterday, you know where I'm going with this. The children of Ham, especially in the lineage of Canaan, were giants. Those were the Amorites, the Jebusites, the Hivites, all the ites that Joshua and his boys had to take out, and later David and his boys had to take out. They were sons of Canaan. Now, Mitzrayim also, Mitzrayim, had a son named Caphtor who settled Crete. Crete is where all of Greek mythology originates from, so you got giants coming out of him. Nimrod, I believe, was also a giant, and that's Cush. That's 3 out of 4 children that Ham had that all had giants. And so if angels aren't doing it, what do we have left? If Noah and his wife are pure, that means that his 3 sons were pure. So Ham was pure, just as pure as Shem and Japheth was. The only thing that makes any sense to me is that the wife of Ham probably had corrupt seed in her own genetics that perpetuated after the flood. And the same may be true with Japheth's wife. If you look into Gog and Magog, they were also giants. So I believe that it passed through that way. Now, people would say, that's absurd, Rob. Why would God allow Nephilim seed onto the ark? And I just throw the question right back at him. Your suggestion of a second incursion is even more absurd, because if God had to destroy the entire planet because it had been completely destroyed because angels mated with women, why would God allow them to do that again? So I think it makes more sense that he would allow genetic seed, whatever dormant Nephilim genes, to pass through is a lot less absurd than the opposite situation there. But ultimately, why does God do anything? He does it to get the glory. Right? Now, he got the glory for the flood, but in the post-flood world, he got the glory through 80-year-old guys and little shepherd boys, right? Little shepherd boys. He got the glory through his people. And finally, regarding this whole issue, which is going to take us into the Roswell scenario, if all the angels had to do was have sex, then what's the deal with all this genetic experimentation and alien grays? Why all that? That's a whole lot of trouble, scientific experiment, extraction of seed and implanting of embryos and all of that nonsense. If all they had to do was have sex, what's the deal with this? My belief is that the grays are actually biological suits that the demons have created for themselves. They are disembodied spirits that are always looking for a body. But a funny thing happened when Jesus showed up is they started getting casted out of bodies. And then Jesus replicated himself and his followers went around casting out demons too. So that becomes a bit of a problem, doesn't it? If you possess somebody and the Christian shows up and casts you out. So I believe that they decided, you know what? We're going to create our own bodies. And so you got all sorts of genetic material being extracted from humans as well as animals. I believe these are biological suits that they've created to do tangible work on this earth. What are they doing? Well, there's this short video I put together by Dr. David Jacobs. Have any of you heard of Dr. David Jacobs? He's interviewed a lot of people who have claimed to have alien abduction experiences, and this is what he has to say based on his years of research.
There's never been a phenomenon like this. This is completely unprecedented. Everything that happens on board is for a reason, everything is logical, everything is rational, and everything is understandable with enough information. This was not a learning experience, and it wasn't an experiment. They weren't trying to figure out what makes us tick. The evidence suggested that this was a program. There is a reason for this program to be put in place. That's what the evidence clearly points to. What was happening was that people were talking about this reproductive material. People were having sperm taken, they were having eggs taken. People report that they were having embryos injected into them and sometimes retrieved from them.
What we conclude is that maybe these people are creating hybrids, creating a special race of people with DNA from us, human DNA, and with the alien DNA, creating people that are, I guess, more intelligent, more sophisticated. And I have heard other people tell me stories alluding to that effect.
For years and years and years, people would write to me and say, oh, well, are adult hybrids walking among us? And the answer is absolutely not. There's no evidence whatsoever that that's the case. But the evidence that I've been getting recently in terms of the goals of the program is that that might be the case. I don't really know yet. It's possible. And I am embarrassed even to say that. I'm embarrassed. And yet, It fits the pattern of all the evidence that I've been hearing for the past 20 years. It's focused on hybrids. The reproduction is to reproduce hybrids, and it does appear to be an integration program, as crazy as that may sound.
Puts the whole scripture as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man into a little bit more focus, doesn't it?